Welcome to F9 Snare. This is such a simple concept, but is incredibly powerful. We wanted to give you just one location on your filing system and sample library that you can always go to get the very best punchy, hard-hitting snare drum for your production. Now, we've done this by bringing together a massive collection of over 1,000 very carefully produced and engineered one-shot hits across as many genres as we can, but then also delving into the realm of synthetic snare drums. We're all used to the synth engines that create 808, 909 and 606 snare drums, but once we started looking into this, we realized just how big of a potential this area was. And we have fully multi-sampled over 400 synthetic snare drums for this collection. And we've sampled them all with up to 8 times round robin. We've then brought everything together in a perfectly formatted pack and delivered these sounds in as many of the major sampler formats as we can. Logic, Ableton, Bitwig, Kontakt, Halion, Sonic and MPC. And Halion, Sonic and MPC, thanks to the MPC Beats software, are free VST, AU and AAX samplers. So these can be used by any DAW user. Not only that, the pack is very well organized just for drag and drop, and in the extras section we've also converted the entire collection to 16-bit and truncated the names for those using door-less setups or vintage samplers. This is as organized and as powerful as we can make it, and this is before even we start to get into the layering options. So let's not waste any time and let's just go straight in and have a look. Organisation has been the key with this release. Let's look inside Folder 1 Digital Snares. Think of these as the one-shot snare hits that you're so used to. But when we twirl down this folder, this is the list of all of the different types of snare drums just in this single folder. And each of these category folders will contain a minimum of 24 snare drums each. Here's the 808s. And of course a collection of 909s. This is just an overview video, so I'm not going to go through all of the different snare drums. Please look for other videos on the product page for this. But here's just a few highlights. Boom bap snares. Snares for house. Drum and bass snares.
We need jungle.
A part of this library I'm really proud of are these ghost snare drums. Now, they're marked up for house, but they will work with so many other different genres. And these are the modern equivalent of the kind of softer grace note hits that a drummer might play in between the main strikes of a backbeat. And some really characterful ones, a collection of pitched snare drums. But the history of the snare drum was changed dramatically with the introduction of synthetic snare drums, originally built with analog circuits and now including digital and even physical modeling. We got so many of them covered here. This is the second folder. It doesn't look like there's much in, but let's have a look, say, at the 808 style snares. Twirl that down, and when you twirl them down, you can see we've got 43 different 808 snare drums that all have been sampled at 8 times round robin. This is an incredible collection. Now, why have we done them round robin? Because most synthetic snares have noise elements or even analog circuitry, and that creates a degree of randomness. So if you want to capture the real soul of these machines, then what you have to do is sample multiple hits and then kind of rotate around a number of them. In this part of the folder structure, you can access any of these individual hits and do whatever you want with them, drag them onto a page, put it into your hardware, you name it. But obviously this kind of sampling comes on into its own when we move into the sampler instruments. So let's go through those right now. And we're going to start with Logic. All of the snare patches can be reached in Logic by clicking the Library tab. Here they are. They're organized exactly like the main folders inside the pack, and absolutely everything is here. All you got to do is click on one and it will load very fast if you're on a modern Mac as well. And being built out of the internal sampler, we can use the built-in system's perfect round-robin playback, and that's exactly what we're doing here on this 808 style patch. Now, of course, we've got smart controls and an effects chain that you can see here. Let me show you what some of this can do. The amp envelope has a hold parameter, and that means you can tweak using these macros the exact playback length you want from any of the sample patches. And the velocity knob right here will control the amount of velocity sensitivity of the filter and the amp envelope. So if I turn this all the way to the left, you'll get none of those changes, just filter all the way open and amp all the way loud, no matter how hard or soft you play. And one thing to note here, on these 4 bottom knobs, they also turn some of the plugins on and off. So for example, if I turn this tiled rim up, look at what happens. You'll see the chroma verb come on and off. There we go. As soon as it's engaged, chroma verb's on, but when you actually take it to its lowest setting, it bypasses that plugin so that you're not using those resources. This macro controls the internal drive of the filter circuit. But my favorite one I've left till last, and that is this poke control. So we've got Logic's modulator plugin set at the top of the channel, so it's a MIDI effect, and it has an envelope that will kind of generate a bit like a CV voltage or a control voltage that we can use to send to certain plugins. So I'm just going to turn it all the way down, and I'm going to open up a little gain plugin that I've got set here. Now look at what happens when I turn this poke control up. So we're using the combination of this envelope and this gain plugin to create a MIDI triggered transient processor. Now this is better than audio trigger because it knows exactly when the note is coming in. It's very, very precise. This is a great little hack, and it's worked perfectly on this snare collection. And of course, being smart controls, they are so easily accessible with automation. We've had a lot of fun with these on the audio demos like this section here. And you hear those delays there? I must show you this. We often forget that snare drums, being very percussive, can be great effects. They can really be useful. And on any channel inside of Logic, if you come down here to where it says stereo output and flip that onto binaural panner, then you can actually do some 3D style or sort of kind of pseudo 3D moves, even without turning Logic's Atmos on. F9 Snare contains 2 Ableton folders. This first one is for users of Ableton 9.6 up to 11, and it will have 8 macros on each rack. This second folder is for Ableton Live 11 onwards, including Ableton 12, and we've been able to include a full set of 16 macros. Now, the beauties of having this set up as a pack is that we can use the preview system. So if I click on any of the racks, so let me just loop around a small section in this production and show you what some of these macros can do. So let me just now quickly explain some of these macros, particularly the FM controls down here. If you don't use Ableton Suite, you may not be aware that the fully featured sampler actually has a frequency modulation engine in that you can use on any sample, and that's what we're doing here. The macro controls will control the amount of modulation, the frequency of the modulation, and the decay of this percussive style envelope. And the great thing is, with the macros that we've set up here, even users of Live Standard can access it. The Clipper macro drives into an almost unity gain Clipper subrack that we've built out of the glue compressor. The Cytomic glue compressor has a wonderful little analog style clipping function in it, and we're using that to great effect here. Like a few of the macros here, when you put it to its lowest setting, as you can see, the entire section of that circuitry turns off, saving you CPU cycles. Okay, the byte controls. Here we've got byte and byte release. Okay, these are controlling this MIDI triggered envelope. So for every single snare hit, this envelope is going to trigger, and it is set to just push out a little bit on this utility plugin and add some gain. So in other words, if I give it a whack, the drive macro goes to two destinations. Not only does it control the internal drive of the Cytomic analog modeled filter, but also this classic shaper control that's been on the Ableton sampler for a long time. Together, they're very powerful and can add some real girth and weight to these snares. Ableton doesn't actually have a hold control in its envelope, but we've kind of hacked this a little bit and changed the curve of the decay parameter so it acts very similar to a hold. So you've got some nice controls within these macros for the amp envelope. And whilst we're here, one really little fun tip that I've found whilst putting the audio demos together: stick an arpeggiator in front of one of these patches, put it to 32nd notes to something like a 50% gate, and then twiddle and alternate all of the macros. You get this. Let's just put that on another note so you can hear a different sound. There were so many fun things to put on these Ableton racks that we didn't actually have space to put a velocity sensitivity control, but that's easily accessible. Just twirl open the rack and get to the simpler that is running it. And when you hit the control tabs of the simpler, you can change the amount of velocity sensitivity here on the amplitude envelope, and also the velocity response of the filter here. Let's now have a look inside of Bitwig. On the remote controls, we've got the filter frequency of the snares, filter resonance, and the velocity amount that will affect the filter. We've also got a byte control that, again, is using an envelope and just punching a little bit of extra level out of the device. You can also control the velocity sensitivity of the amp, the attack, hold, and release. It's always handy to have a hold parameter on an envelope when you're chucking out drum sounds. And we've also added two additional racks into the effects chain of this device. So we've got some nice simple macro style EQ, just bass, low mid, high mid, and top. The bottom row contains the controls of a compressor. And then on this second one, we're using 4 convoluters here, which you turn on and off. And then you can apply variable amounts of reverb. We've got a room reverb, a non-linear reverb, a hall, and a plate. Let me just solo this and you'll see what I mean. And in this little track, I'm just using the D&B Liquid snares, the boom bap snares, just as a fill here at the end. And playing against the main tight snare are these knocky rim shot sounds with a lot of the reverbs applied. And altogether, they do this. And one thing I really want to make clear here, I have used these straight out of the box. I haven't hardly touched anything apart from a little bit of the reverb there. And that is just how punchy all of these snares are in use. I'm ever so pleased with what we've managed to achieve in the Kontakt portion of this library. And due to its stellar sound engine, if you have a full install of Kontakt available on your system, I really recommend you run the library through this as much as possible. Let's look at the controls here. Starting up on the top left, we've got some basic amp controls, attack, hold and decay. Again, perfect for really tuning up the actual length of the snare drums that you want. Let me show you what I mean. Any amp envelope that has a hold parameter is perfect for drum sounds, and that's no exception here. The velocity slider controls how much of a velocity response your playing will have to the amp envelope, standard behavior. Okay, let's come down to the filter. We've got a low-pass filter with resonance control here, and also an internal drive. These are the modeled filters inside of Kontakt. I believe this is a Moog-style filter, so this emulates the circuit drive. And again, this slider will control how much the incoming note velocity affects the filter. There is a transient processor built into Kontakt, and we're using it here to add some attack, bite, and some sustain. If you want to return these, or any of the controls for that matter, to the center or original position, just command click on a Mac or control click on a PC. High pass filter with resonance. And on the bottom right here, we've got a number of IR-based reverbs. So you can mix and match a little bit of these as much as you want. And just on these main controls, we've got one extra here. If you click and mouse up on the F9 logo, you will add some drive. And as you can hear, that happens before the reverb, so it doesn't blow the reverbs out. Kontakt also has a built-in SSL emulated EQ, and we're using that to great effect on these bottom controls here. All 4 bands are available. We've got 2 parametric bands here. You can see in the middle the green and the blue, and the top end here in red and the bottom end here in black are shelf by default, but if you click on the frequency word and they turn red, you will flip that over to a bell-shaped curve. And then there's a really nice feedback compressor inside of Kontakt, so we've used it here to give you just a little bit more extra grunt on the direct output of this. And all of these GUI parameters are available as automation. And Logic users, you'll be glad to know that we've labeled them so that they appear at the top of the list, so you don't have to go searching through a huge set of numbers like this. They all just appear straight up here, so it's nice and easy to get to. And MPC users, including users of MPC Beats, we got a full MPC expansion, and all of the programs obviously have audio previews. The only extra consideration we've had to make for this platform is that we've had to keep the round-robin nature of the synth drums just to 4 round robins, because that's all the current system can actually allow. But they work beautifully on board, and we've got a full set of Q-Link controls all set up here. So if you're a power user of the MPC, this is perfectly set up to go. Halion Sonic has now been updated, and we are supporting the earlier version of Halion Sonic and Halion Sonic 7. Please note, this is a totally free sampler for all DAW users. This will run as a VST, an AU and an AAX plugin, which pretty much covers everything. Halion has always sounded superb, and we're just starting to get our head round some of the things that we can do with it here. I've actually used it to great effect on the first part of the up-tempo house demo that you will have heard by now, hopefully. So as well as the GUI controls that you can see here, I've also added some macros here. So you can change the pitch in either coarse tones or fine semitones here. Low pass filter cutoff, low pass filter resonance. Oh yes, the low pass filter drive. Now, the drive, I've always thought in one of the filters inside of Halion has always sounded fantastic. Macros for the high-pass filter and the output control are also available, and all of these are easily grabbable for automation. But there's far more controls actually, as you can see here on the GUI. We've got attack, hold, and release envelopes here, and these two sliders control how the thing responds to velocity. The filter controls are replicated here with the drive. There's the high-pass filter and high-pass res, and at the bottom we've got the ability to send off into 3 different reverbs. A Hall Reverb Studio, and a Plate Reverb. There is also a transient processor hidden inside of Halion Sonic, so we can either soften or harden the attack and bring more of the sustain up if we wish. It's a really punchy little sampler, and for something that is completely free, utterly remarkable. And this beat is actually a perfect example of using ghost snares against nice, tight, solid backbeats. And obviously, don't ever take the actual genres in the titles of the patches as gospel. Here, I've used one of the jungle snares to great effect inside this house track. One of the key components of the Argon drum range has been the layer system, and here we've got a whole collection. Now, layers are things that you can overlay on top of a snare drum to give it maybe ambience, some character and interest. And let's go through a few of the folders here. Each one of these folders, again, contains a minimum of 24 sounds. These are the Foley hits. We've got some low-bit digital noise. Some classic synthesizer noise. When we started to look into the synth end of snare drums, we realized a lot of them have like a diving pitch element. A Simmons hit is a perfect example of this. So we've created a whole series of synthetic pitch dives to layer over the top of static sounds. Pre-shifts, these are fantastic for adding that kind of little almost pre-clap that you used to get on disco records, heard all over new disco and modern pop at the moment. The transient layer folder contains a whole series of really deliberately short, carefully processed, powerful little bits of audio you can overlay onto snare drums to just edge them a little bit further forward. Ever so useful, and we've used them a lot in the audio demos. Vinyl hits. And these are some reverberated percussion samples that work wonderfully. and a ton of ambience options. For example, these are non-lin. Spring reverb, again from the Great British Spring. Non-lin 808s. And some lovely big plates. And some springs. Many now classic hardware samplers were synonymous with various styles of music. So this is where the Resampled Snares folder and instruments come into play from this pack. What we've done is carefully selected and sourced a whole number of vintage samplers and placed some genre-specific snare drums, sampled them into the machine and then chucked them back out. Now this means you get both conversion routes. You get the sampling process going in and the converters going out. And then we've resampled everything through some tasty hardware too. Now a perfect example are the drum and bass and jungle snares. We've used an Akai S1100, something that was synonymous with that style of music. But not only that, we sourced an old Mackie mixer that was renowned for distorting really well and overdriven the inputs and then resampled back in through our Apogee. The S1100 was renowned as quite a bright sampler, and it's really added some magic for this genre's snare drums. For the sharp R&B snares, we put them through an ASR10. Now, this is a sampler that was synonymous with, say, like the Timbaland or the Kanye era. One of the most rewarding finds in hardware samplers for this collection has to be this, the Yamaha SU700, a device that will actually sample 8-bit in stereo. And of course, this was perfect for the synthwave and retro snares in this collection. I love what this sampler does to reverb tails on these snares. It almost adds the kind of grain you'd expect from an 80s film. That will cut through a modern synthwave production like a knife through butter. An incredible find. Live snares, and here we've got two main folders with two different styles of snare drum. The first comes from a session we did a good few years back with a professional drummer and some beautiful snare drums like a Ludwig Black Beauty. These were multi-mic'd through an API desk, and then we've presented them here as 10 hits, 10 round-robin hits for 8 different snare drums. This will give you all the variation you should need for drum fills. The second folder is slightly different, and it contains drum hits that have been resampled from live recordings at 4 different velocities, but all processed to give a massive amount of modern punch compared to the softer elements in the first folder. And a quick trip now into the extras folder. This entire section up here has been duplicated into 16-bit. Now, the only thing that we have done here, this is really important to understand, is that we've truncated the names. Now, why would we do that? Well, a lot of the older hardware samplers need a lower character count on their file names, which is why we've done it like this. So anybody who needs 16-bit snares can jump in here, and they should load in to almost any sampler you can think of. ESX24 patches. These are available in case anybody is still using an older version of Logic, like for example 10.4. You can drop these into your sampler instruments folder and then pick them up in any instance of an ESX24 from the menus. The pre-shift loops are available as WAVs and Apple loops. This is so they are just basically drag and drop for any DAW. What are they? Well, it's easier if I just show you. Here's a very rough bounce of one of the demos. And here's the snare drum. This is actually bounced out of some of the sampler instruments in use from this pack. And these are 2 pre-shift loops. Let me play you them both in solo. See what they're doing? They add some interest just coming up to that main snare drum. When you add them with the snare drum, you get this. And look at what happens when I actually put these into the track. So this is before. And this is with the pre-shift loops in play. All of this comes about because in old 70s disco recordings, the clap track was done by humans. There are actually people in a studio clapping, and often people are in front of the beat, which gives this little bit of information just before the snare drum hit. These are ever so useful to work in with your own productions. Thank you so much for watching this walkthrough video of F9 Snare. This is the second release in our Argon drums range, and yes, we will cover everything else. We've already been asked for claps, hats, toms, cymbals, and even percussion, but all of these turn into incredible journeys once you start looking into them. But I'm so pleased to get this out to you guys now. It is a fantastic collection and one that I've already had a ton of fun putting together. Thanks so much for watching. If you're new to this and you've liked this, don't forget to like and subscribe on any of the social channels that you may be watching this. Have a great start to your production this year, and all the best from us. Take care.